You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Buick. News, views and interviews in association with FE News. Hello, I'm Tom Buick. It's that time again for your weekly instalment of Skills World Live. And what's the message this week from old Blighty folks as the remainder of England's shops and pubs prepare to reopen on what's been dubbed Super Saturday? Build, build, build. That's what, according to our Eton and Balliol College, Oxford, educated Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Yep, if you were one of those lucky students at Dudley FE College this week, Bojo, the master builder, was a meticulous 200 centimetres away, complete with hard hat and high-vis jacket placed strategically for all the TV news cameras. And talking of builders, I've been catching up on that 1980s sitcom, Our Wiedersehen Pet. Remember Oz, Moxie and Barry from Wolverhampton? Well, like some parallel universe, if the dire predictions of 4.5 million on the dole by the end of the year are true, many more of us might be saying adios to our former careers and bonjour to the new. Time for skills, 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 I hear you say. Not that I'm planning on retraining for a hospital radio position just yet. Let's face it, folks, South Downs Radio is far too good for me. Still, plenty to be getting on with here as I broadcast the only community online radio show connecting the world of FE from my man cave studio here in the heart of Sussex. We're up to episode 34 of providing all the news, views and interviews from around the world. Your world, Skills World. That's right, folks. Stand by for another 60 glorious minutes of topical discussion and debate as we dive into the policy toolkit and get under the bonnet of the University and Graduate Employment Challenge. You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Buick. On tonight's programme, we'll be spending most of our time looking at higher education. It comes in a week when the Universities Minister has launched a scathing attack on low-value degree courses. I'll be interviewing the shadow FE and Universities Minister, Labour's Emma Hardy MP, about whether the 2004 HE Access reforms and Tony Blair's infamous 50% participation target are really all to blame. In the phone chat sections of the show, we'll be continuing the theme with our expert guests. They include Professor Martin Jones, an economic geographer and Deputy Vice-Chancellor. Joining him in the debate will be Stephen Isherwood, the boss of the Institute of Student Employers, and the data scientist Richard Hewitt of EMSI. Been wondering what's happened to hashtag Stand Up for Skills? Well, after Kirsty Donnelly's big Education Select Committee appearance last week, when she had a little break from the programme, that one-woman skills campaign machine is back, this time as my guest in the final phone chat section of the show. She's even brought the chair of the Education Select Committee, Robert Halford MP, with her. I'll be discussing with them both a major skills report published today by Kirsty's charity, the City and Guilds Group. But first, let's find out what's been making the news headlines in your skills world this week. Prime Minister Boris Johnson revised his apprenticeship guarantee policy earlier this week. Delivering a major speech at Dudley FE College in the West Midlands, the Prime Minister announced an opportunity guarantee, saying that every young person would be given the chance of an apprenticeship or an in-work placement. Sector leaders welcome the move, although exact details of how such a guarantee can be practically supported are still yet to emerge. In other news, the Secretary of State for Education, Gavin Williamson, has published fresh guidance on what changes schools and FE providers will need to make in England to fully open from September. This will include welcoming back those adults attending community learning centres. The Department for Education said that there would be no set requirement to teach student cohorts in smaller than normal class sizes. Bill Watkin, Chief Executive of the Sixth Form Colleges Association, said his members welcomed the flexibilities, but that public transport remained a major concern. And finally, the Universities Minister, Michelle Donnellan, delivered a speech this week on boosting social mobility, in which she said the 2004 higher education access reforms had let down too many young people. With university participation for under 30-year-olds now at 50% of the cohort, Donnellan lambasted the HE sector, saying that too many universities had felt pressured to dumb down in recent years. She added that a lot of popular-sounding courses had resulted in students being misled, with degree holders not finding real demand in the labour market for their skills. That's all your Skills World news from fenews.co.uk. Contact us at Skills World Live. Email skillsworld@fenews.co.uk. Follow us on Twitter @Tom Buick, @FENews. Use the hashtag SkillsWorld. Call us on 02032 900 111. That's 02032 900 111.
It's getting closer to midnight. I try to get closer to you. Drinking courage from my red cup now. I will soon make a move. Ooh, I can taste it. The bittersweetness of taking a shot. A risk worth taking. If it's a shot of love, baby, I adore you. Maybe I adore you. Yeah, I'm feeling high and high. I'm up on cloud nine. Baby, I adore you. I try to focus on breathing. My heart is skipping a beat. Your lips against the red cup makes me lose my mind completely. Ooh, I can taste it. The bittersweetness of taking a shot. A risk worth taking it. It's a shot of love. Baby, I adore you. Maybe I adore you. Yeah, I'm feeling high and high. I'm up on cloud nine. Baby, I adore you. Trying my best not to lose control. I want you, that's all I know. Trying my best not to lose control. 'Cause I adore you, adore you. Trying my best not to lose control. I want you, that's all I know. Trying my best not to lose control. 'Cause I adore you. Baby, I adore you. Maybe I adore you. Yeah, I'm feeling high and high. I'm up on cloud nine. Baby, I adore you. Trying my best not to lose control. I want you, that's all I know. Trying my best not to lose control. 'Cause I adore you, adore you.
That was Adore You by WakeApp, another one of those epidemicsound.com belters that are designed for those fitness fanatics out there who often email the team to tell us that they listen to the show during their regular workout exercise regime. It led to the show's editor, Gavin O'Mara, to come up with his own Fight the Flab campaign by attaching the hashtag FEWorkout to all the programme's social media output. Do keep those emails coming in, though, folks. We love hearing from you. skillsworld@fenews.co.uk. During tonight's big debate, we're discussing what is going to happen to the 230,000 university graduates that will hit the workforce this summer. This figure comes on top, of course, of over 500,000 under 25-year-olds that are already jobless, with 250,000, that's an eye-watering 250,000 of them, having been made unemployed since March. Joining me on the line now to discuss these issues is tonight's special guest and Labour's shadow FE and Universities Minister, Emma Hardy MP. Good evening, Emma.
Evening.
You must look at those shocking youth unemployment numbers and fear that we could see the same sort of generational carnage and long-term scarring effects of the early 1980s all over again.
It is an extremely worrying situation, and there is a real risk without the government taking urgent action very, very quickly that we will see. We talk of a lost generation, and it's tragic to sort of think of it that way. But these are people's aspirations, these are people's hopes, these are individuals, 230,000 individual people out there who might not have the opportunities that we were so lucky to have, which is why the government really, really do need to take action. And there has been a plan put forward by Universities UK, the umbrella organisation for all universities, to look at creating a paid graduate internship programme. And I think this is an absolutely excellent idea. And what they've proposed is this 1-year UK-wide scheme of recovery internships, working with local enterprise partnerships in England and various groups in the devolved nations to offer these paid internships to graduates, because that's what they need. The last thing we want is our graduates who've worked and studied so hard for all this time at university, them finding the jobs aren't available. And this isn't down to individual universities, because I've been speaking to college leaders from the University of Oxford who've been telling me that businesses are getting rid of their paid internship programs this year because this is about our economy. And I think all too soon, as we've seen sort of more recently, the government likes to pin the blame on, well, it's the course that the student took. Oh, it's the university that the student went to. And it's not. As they've said many times, it's the economy, stupid. It's, this is about the economy. And our economy at the moment is going to be in severe trouble. And we need to ensure that we give those graduates extra support.
Okay.
And one simple thing, a graduate internship program, could make such a huge difference.
Yeah. As you say, lots of ideas out there being put forward by all sorts of peak level and lobby organisations about, importantly, how do we keep young people off the dole. I mean, the government has put in place this unprecedented coronavirus job retention scheme. It's allowed universities as well to draw down in advance of about £2.5 billion in student fees. And of course, the Prime Minister announced this week potentially billions to support what he's called an opportunity guarantee for young people through apprenticeships and in-work placements. Presumably that could extend to graduate internships as well. I mean, would Labour do anything differently from the government on all of that?
Well, I think it's important to sort of dig down into some of the promises that the government have actually made. Okay, so they've talked about a guaranteed apprenticeship, but I mean, I think anybody who looks into this in any detail knows you can't guarantee an apprenticeship, because apprenticeships by their very nature are created by businesses and by having, a successful economy. Yeah. The only thing the government could promise is some sort of training scheme, which is not the same as an apprenticeship. So you can't make that promise to guarantee an apprenticeship. And when the government have been approached with ideas for paid graduate internship programs, in fact, when I raised it personally with the university's minister, it was pushed back and said, well, universities can sort out their own ways of dealing with this. And I do want to actually mention what Sheffield Hallam are doing. So it was sort of pushed back as this is a problem for universities to deal with. And everything the government are offering in terms of the furlough scheme are for people already in employment. That doesn't actually offer anything for people who are graduating this year. And it feels like these are sort of a group of people that the government are just sort of sweeping to the side because they don't fall into the furlough scheme because they're not already employed. They're not going to be looking for apprenticeships because they've just completed their degree. So what are they going to do? I mean, to me, there are two options really that the government should be looking at. One of them is how can we then ensure that these young people or adults, should I say, who have completed their degrees maybe go on and do the masters, in which case I took it to the minister and said, well, the £10,000 loan that you're offering masters students is not actually enough to cover the cost of the course and maintenance. And her response to it was, well, the hospitality trade is picking up, they might be able to get part-time work. Well, they might, but then my fear is, though, that then the students who decide to stay and complete master's qualifications are students who are already from a more advantaged and wealthy background, because then they don't have to only rely on the loan to do so.
Indeed. So, and I mean, the government's own Social Mobility Commission, of course, has shown that. I mean, not only in relation to higher education places, but also increasingly actually around the apprenticeship programme as well. But can I take it, Emma, in terms of what you're saying then about how potentially, as we look to try and get ourselves out of this crisis. We'll try and obviously protect the most vulnerable, and we certainly don't want a return to the 1980s, do we, of a lost, so-called lost generation of young people that once they're unemployed, a lot, under the age of 24, all the research, all the longitudinal research that's been done has actually showed how that's been very damaging to their future employment and income prospects. I mean, that point about the billions that go through the student loans company, I mean, at the moment, universities do have a bit of a monopoly, don't they, on that money? Couldn't that be used more flexibly? Because I think that's what you're suggesting, more flexibly to help young people, young adults, students, graduates and non-graduates, actually make a reality then out of this so-called opportunity guarantee. Because it's interesting that the Prime Minister's moved away now from talking about an apprenticeship guarantee, presumably because of your point. It's very hard to mandate employers, isn't it, to actually provide jobs that don't exist.
Yeah, and this opportunity guarantee is sort of as vague and as tangible as his various promises that the Prime Minister made.
Yeah.
But I think there are a couple of things which I think are worth drawing attention to, and I do just want to mention what Sheffield Hallam are doing, because this is something the university has decided to do itself. So we know that there is a huge problem in our schools with the disadvantage attainment gap growing because of lockdown. And the government have talked about the need for tutors, and that we need to have lots and lots of tutors offering catch-up support. Again, what the government have failed to do is actually look into the details and look at regions of the country where we have fewer tutors available. So if they want to do this mass sort of tutoring programme for pupils, then we're going to need lots and lots of tutors, and we currently don't have them evenly spread throughout the UK. So what Sheffield Hallam are looking at doing is offering their graduates a short intensive training programme to train them up as tutors to be able to go and support students in their local area, pupils in their local area. So I suppose you could summarise it as education supporting education. And they're running a pilot project which not only deals with the sort of immediate problem, what are these graduates going to do? Well, they're going to get some paid work working as tutors, but also the other problem, how are we going to deal with the disadvantage attainment gap from all of these young people that are in the area? Now, I think that is an incredibly brilliant idea that deals with a local problem using graduates. This is a proper, what I'd call civic university in action. And of course, they can't get a meeting with the government to discuss it. And so far, the government haven't responded to any of the communications that they've been making.
Well, look, I can tell you, Emma, a lot of senior officials, indeed ministers, listen to this show because of its focus purely on tertiary education, FE and higher education. So hopefully you will get a response to that communication soon. Now, look, I mean, the minister that you are shadowing, Michelle Donnellan, I mean, she gave a pretty incendiary speech this week, you could say, in which she blamed actually the 2004 higher education reforms. That's the last Labour government that resulted in mass higher education. She says that that's one of the reasons why a third of graduates are now in non-graduate jobs. I mean, I appreciate that it is your job to oppose the government, but was there anything in that speech she gave this week that you would agree with?
Well, I did find it quite astonishing, really, on a number of levels. And, and I have to say, I know Michelle. I worked with her on the Education Select Committee, so any personal comments, but it was quite an astonishing speech for various reasons. I think we all know it is a fact that if you're looking at the LEO data, if you're looking at the greatest prediction on how a graduate will perform in their later life, it's actually how well they do at school and what kind of background they come from. So it does feel slightly astonishing that we've had a government that have been in power now for over a decade, reduced funding for our schools, cut funding from FE, cut funding from the entire school system, increasing the number of people living in poverty and disadvantage, and then say, oh, actually, it's the university's fault these graduates haven't performed very well. So I think that's quite astonishing to sort of blame what universities have done in the past few years for what has been an entire young person's educational experience. I think it was also kind of quite astonishing that there was no caveats placed in there that we're looking at the regional disparity, especially from a government that likes to talk about levelling up an awful lot. That wasn't mentioned in there whatsoever. And I think it's also that people are making these decisions, and it was quite... what I feared with it in the comment that I put out there was almost this presumption that if you come from a disadvantaged background, then don't look at these courses. These courses are not for you. You should be focusing on these courses. And I think that's a really dangerous mindset to get into. I think what we should be looking at for each and every single young person out there looking and thinking about university is looking at what they're interested in. What are their talents and ambitions? What do they want to do? What kind of career do they want to pursue?
Yeah.
And this idea that, well, actually, you should only be interested in these because that will earn you more money. What if you are interested in that? What if you want to be an entrepreneur? What if you want to create your own startup? All of these different things.
Sure, but
that
Emma,
can come from what higher education path you choose.
Yeah, sorry to butt in, but look, what you're referring to there, I think, is what I think most fair-minded people would accept, that there's more to higher education than just the straight economic equation of the labour market. And there was a time when obviously education for education's sake, particularly at higher education level, was generally accepted. But we're now in a world, aren't we, where obviously half of the cohort, there's a whole issue of, and let's talk about it in a minute in terms of FE, there's a whole issue about what are we doing, frankly, for the other half that don't go to university. But let's just focus on those that do at the moment. It's a different world from, say, 2-3 decades when I was at university. The value of a lot of these qualifications, first jobs, income, the amount of debt and loans that, okay, you don't have to pay it back until you earn over a certain amount. But do you think that's the pressure now that's really storing up in the system? That's why universities are getting such a hard time from their sponsoring minister in the DFE?
Well, I think the data speaks for itself, that as a woman, you are going to earn 50% more than a woman who has not been to university if you actually have a degree. That's what the data shows. Admittedly, it's 25% higher if you're a man, but for a woman's earning potential is 50% higher if you've been to university. I think that data speaks for itself. This idea about using graduate earning income as a way of driving policy is, I think, the best quote I've ever seen on this is driving skills policy by looking in the rearview mirror. Right. So are we really, in 10 years' time, going to look back at this period and see, look, no one should get a degree in the hospitality trade because, look, they're not earning anything because of what's actually happened with the economy. I think we should, we cannot make decisions purely based on what's happening in the past. In my opinion, we should be looking at the future, looking at the areas where jobs growth are going to be. They're going to be in AI, they're going to be in green energy. We're going to need loads more key workers, health professionals, allied health. We know we're going to have problems with our mental health. We're going to need more people working in those professions as well. So we should be looking to the future to get our economy ready. If we base every decision on lagged data from 10 years ago, then we're not going to be building for the future. We're going to be trying to recreate the past. And I don't think that's what the government should be doing.
All right.
And I find it quite difficult when you have a government that has like a majority of people. Actually, I shouldn't say majority because I need to fact check that. A number of people who have humanities degrees sort of saying, well, these degrees are not for the likes of you. These are just for people like us. And I think that's dangerous territory for the government to be getting into.
Do you think that's what it is? They are potentially kicking away the ladder of opportunity, or is it in fact the fact that ladder of opportunity is great if you are in that 50% cohort, but actually if you're not, then we know it's more precarious. The employment, 0-hour contracts, the type of income you might earn over a lifetime. Yes, we've made great progress actually under successive governments in technical education, in apprenticeships, all of that, but we're still sort of scratching around for for a solution that's at least as good as places like Switzerland and Germany. Where is your front bench these days on reports like the Augar Review? Do you support T-levels? Do you support that whole direction of travel then?
Obviously that's not, it's not my brief, so I'm not going to speak for my colleague. But I'm a huge fan of apprenticeships. I was all the way through on the Education Select Committee, and in fact, I went with Rob Halfon, who I think is on tonight. We went and we visited Germany, and we looked at the system there. And I am an absolute advocate of that, and absolutely 100% behind. We need to invest more in skills. We need to invest more in FE. We need to be looking at apprenticeships. Where I start to get a bit sort of irritated with the system is, why is that always put up in competition with higher education?
Right.
Why can the government not simply see that we need both? We need that world-class, functioning, highly capable higher education system that does in some cases give people more generalised training where they might then go on and specialise, as I did. I did a degree in politics, and then I did my PGCE to become a teacher. And lots of people do that path with their undergraduate degree. They do sort of a more generalised degree and then specialise. Why not keep those options open? And my fear is, again, if you start saying to young people, you're going to have to choose this sort of narrow path at the age of 18, and not kind of keep your options open. They're going to have to make that decision really early on. And my worry is it will be, again, children from more wealthy and affluent backgrounds that have those wider opportunities because they're not worried about income, they're not worried about earnings, that get to choose the arts and the humanities. And it will be seen as this two-tier programme, whereas if you're from a poor background, these are the degrees you should do. If you're from a richer background, these are the degrees you should do. And what I believe, what the Labour Party believes, is in that equality of opportunity. Give each and every single young person an equal chance to do what they are interested to do so they can reach their potential.
Okay, well, let's end that note, Emma, on 100% of the cohort. Emma Hardy, Shadow Minister for FE and Universities for the Labour Party. Thanks so much for coming on the show this evening, giving up your time on Skills World Live. Really appreciate it. Bye.
No worries. Take care. Bye.
Just call you when the moon is rising. I'm craving every moment with you. I can't just need you when the tides are turning. I cherish every second with you. I've got to hold on to your heart every day of the week, every week of the year. I've got to rewind and restart so you get what you need, so you get all of me. Yeah, you get all of me, baby, I give you all of me. Please take what you want from me. Ooh, yeah, you get all of me, baby, I give you all of me. Please take what you want from me. All of me. All of me. All of me. Baby, I give you all of me. Please take what you want from me. All of me. I can't just have you any way I want to, 'cause you deserve it all and much more. I can't just want you when the sky is deep blue. I'm better now than I was before. I've got to hold on to your heart every day of the week, every week of the year. I've got to rewind and restart so you get what you need, so you get all of me. Yeah, you get all of me, baby, I give you all of me. Please take what you want from me. Yeah, you get all of me, baby, I give you all of me. Please take what you want from me. All of me. All of me. All of me. Baby, I give you all of me. Please take what you want from me. All of me. I've got to hold on to your heart every day of the week, every week of the year. I've got to rewind and restart so you get what you need, so you get all of me. Yeah, you get all of me, baby, I give you all of me. Please take what you want from me. Yeah, you get all of me, baby, I give you all of me. Please take what you want from me.
That song is You Get All of Me, Catnip, with Astin Tur. Catnip, I do wonder where artists get some of these stage names from. Now, to continue tonight's big debate, we're discussing what might happen to all the graduates spilling onto the labour market this summer. I'm joined now by a very distinguished panel of guests. Richard Hewitt, who's Director of Higher Education at MZ, the labour market data firm. Good evening to you, Richard.
Good evening.
And joining you in this phone chat section is Professor Martin Jones, Deputy Vice-Chancellor at Staffordshire University. Good evening, Martin.
Good evening, Tom.
And then finally, not that we couldn't add even more people, but it's great to have three of you on the line. Stephen Isherwood, Chief Executive at the Institute of Student Employers. I think it's your second turn on the show, along with Martin's. Good evening, Stephen.
It is. Good evening.
Great. Fantastic to have you all. Now, Richard, let me come to you first. Your consultancy firm has done a lot of data crunching on this whole graduate employment and skills challenge. Is it really going to be as bad as some commentators suggest?
It's a good question. So what we're seeing at the moment, what a lot of people are saying at the moment is that the higher skilled end of the job market so far seems to be holding up and compared to the lower skilled end of the jobs market. And we can see that looking at recruitment activity as seen in job postings. The issue with that is actually, if you examine it a bit more closely and look at the graduate outcomes data that was released by HESA last week, you see about a quarter of all graduates going into the third tier of graduate level occupations, the associate professional and technical occupations. And the recruitment there, the recruitment activity, which is one of the best indicators of what might happen in the job market that we have at the moment, isn't holding up, and it's not looking good at all. And then when you take that together with the fact that if you combine that category of jobs, occupational outcomes, with the lower skilled occupational outcomes of graduates, that accounts for nearly half of graduates going into the labour market. If we're happy with the graduate outcome survey. So while the narrative might be, well, it's not as bad for higher education leavers as it is for others, there's an awful lot of graduates that will be likely not to be going into those top two tier highly skilled occupations, who are going to be facing a really difficult time. And it's not just the fact that the recruitment's down, but they're going to be facing increased competition as well, because there's going to be more people.
Well, that's
on the
the thing,
market.
Isn't it? I mean, it's all these different labour market indicators, not just what the headline unemployment rate is for under 25s. It's also how many vacancies are coming into the economy. Although I did think that, I thought that Andy Haldane, the chief economist at the Bank of England, was quite positive this week. I mean, he's even put his neck on the line saying it could be a V-shaped recovery. Now, Martin, your university is around 40 miles up the M6 from where Boris Johnson delivered his big economic, the build speech this week. I mean, when you listen to these references to the New Deal, massive infrastructure spending and guarantees of work opportunities for young people, I mean, as an academic, you must think you're listening to an old Labour politician, not a Etonian Tory. Martin.
Yeah, I mean, some of Boris's speech. I mean, I think you said it in your introduction. Our Vida's End recovery model. Yeah. Certainly, I've seen property-led regeneration schemes like this rise and fall. I think there's a missing dimension of the relationship between physical infrastructures and social infrastructures.
Yeah,
you can build your way in and out of certain things through construction, but I was somewhat disappointed that some of the skills things were not bottomed off and weren't detailed. So I think you can build your way out of trouble part of the way, but I think it requires more radical interventions that I think Emma started to discuss in the first part of your programme. Yeah,
I mean, look, no one's going to turn down the infrastructure spending, but I think the figures I saw this week suggested that it's just under 1% of GDP. And actually, if you are comparing yourself to the likes of Franklin D. Roosevelt, and all of that, then you're looking at 3-4% of GDP just on roads and bridges alone. So I think, as ever, some of this is typical smoke and mirrors, isn't it, from the Treasury, and you've got to try and unpick yourself through the detail. Stephen, I mean, your organisation's been the voice of early careers since 1968. When you look at all these dire predictions, and indeed, I think, Richard was alluding to some of them in his piece earlier with me. I mean, are there any silver linings from an employer perspective? The employers you talk to about what exactly might go on this summer with graduates?
Yeah, the difficulty is we tend to generalize about the graduate labour markets, and of course it's a series of different labour markets. SMEs to the kind of larger organisations that we represent, different sectors. Comparing technology to public sector or to the leisure industries, and they're all being hit in different ways. And some of that's pretty obvious, just by looking at the news headlines every day. We're seeing who's in having challenges. I mean, having said that, I'm just about to generalise. Graduates who've got a job offer, they're the ones that seem to be doing okay, because most of the employers that we talk to are holding firm with their graduate offers. Less so for non-graduate roles. I think that's where we've seen the biggest hit, as we were talking about earlier. And part of that's operational. At this time of the year, most graduate recruiters have kind of filled most of their vacancies. And what we found when lockdown happened is people just said, right, no more, we're not recruiting anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas apprentices and school leavers, they were more likely to still be recruiting. But it all depends on what happens to the economy and the recovery and that stimulus we've been talking about. I mean, I also have a real worry for next year's graduates.
Yeah.
If employers have kind of banked this year's graduates, that might well tide them over for next year. We did see this after the financial crash, which was sort of 2009-10. The year after, actually, there was a bit of a bigger dip then. So I think it's not just this year's, it's next year's we need to worry about as well.
Yeah. Can I ask all of you then to give me your reflections on this idea of an opportunity guarantee? Sort of, again, the language has shifted from a few weeks ago, talking purely about an apprenticeship guarantee. Now it seems to extend into traineeships and work placements, presuming that's related to things like T-levels in England with a 45-day industry placement. Richard, have you got any reflections on that? I saw, by the way, MZ was the firm behind the City and Guilds report we're going to discuss shortly. Yeah, in terms of the data on graduates.
I think what we know is being unemployed is really not a good outcome, and it's not just in the short term. It's long term. There are huge problems with what people call labour market scarring, the long lasting effects of that, and so any scheme, well, I say any, probably wouldn't encompass everything, but a scheme that can look to avoid doing that. And so UK's proposals seek to do that, and that there are other ideas on the table. I think those need to be looked at. But I think in the end, whenever people, because that may also delay the pain.
Yeah.
It could simply be delaying it until those people, put it down the road. And I think in the end, what people need to be able to do at the point they enter the labour market, unless we have really an astonishingly steep and fast recovery, then people are going to need to be able to articulate their skills so that they are competitive with people who already are graduates with some years under their belts.
Yeah.
And I think that's got to be key. So it's that ability to articulate and be at the forefront of where the labour market's going and looking to that future labour market as well.
Sure. And on the subject of interventions then potentially the government might make, Martin, you've written books and sort of studied employment, labour market interventions, active labour market policies going back decades. Is there anything about what you see from things like the coronavirus job retention scheme that gives you more confidence that it could be a little bit different this time, that things have moved on from the make work schemes of the 1980s, or are you sort of still potentially looking in the mirror, in horror, thinking we're going right back to where we've been in the past with some of these ideas?
Tom, I regularly look in the rearview mirror, and as you know, most rearview mirrors say objects look larger. So I think the learning crisis from this is key.
Right.
And I think, and this is the kind of the pitch that I put last time I was on your show, I think it'd be really interesting to look at the guarantee scheme around a brokerage opportunity, using at the local level the local industrial strategy, but also bring some of those arguments around job retention to job rotation. So rather than talking about retention, talk about job rotation, and then I think there's that Danish model that you know too well from the past.
Indeed,
on
the job offer programme, in the 90s.
Yeah, but if you think of the UK document supporting graduates in COVID economy, the internship model in there, which I'm highly supportive of for a variety of reasons, You think how that would work in a job rotation model. I think you can get some really creative thinking at the local level, by anchoring it to the local industrial strategies that we have out there.
Sure.
We're in the wave 3 of that. There's a Devo white paper coming out in the autumn about devolving to mayoral combined authorities more local labour market intervention powers. I think,
and is that a really critical point for you, Martin? Because, I mean, again, you'll know the days of the Manpower Services Commission when things were quite Soviet and top down with some of those schemes. I mean, would you like to see, a real kind of renaissance in the local devolution agenda? Really empower local communities, councils, elected people at that level, rather than waiting for it all to topple down from sanctuary buildings in London.
Yeah, I mean, the worst thing you could have would be a graduate version of the YTS and call it GTS, because that's what I fear about national programmes. Yeah, they're politically attractive. They look good, when ministers are giving speeches around the promises in a Rooseveltian style. But I think more locally grained labour market interventions, working on partnerships between FE and HE, not pitching them against each other, working along skills pipelines. And as you know, I mean, it's not just the local industrial strategies, the SAP work, the skills advisory panels alongside LEPs, I think are...
been no shortage of infrastructure, is there, to try and get these skills matches better aligned?
But I think another key point, Tom, I think, is for coronavirus for me, and it's not just corona, it's kind of Brexit in the background as well.
Yeah.
It's making me, as a labour market academic, think about supply chains. Start to think about supply chain, local and regional economies, because that's how, if you look at the redundancies, how they topple through supply chains. Trying to build intelligent, resilient local economies around supply chains and skills interventions around some of the schemes that we can pitch, I think is a way of thinking slightly differently about the role of HE, certainly in my own post-92 sector. Like most million-plus institutions, we work very differently than the lots of players in the HE sector.
That's a really strong point. I mean, just as you can't generalise about graduates, you shouldn't lump all universities into the same box either, just like you shouldn't with FE colleges. Stephen, any reflections on some of that? I mean, thinking back to that interview I did with the Shadow Minister, Emma Hardy MP, who was talking about the Sheffield Hallam University example. She's particularly keen on this idea of a sort of paid graduate internship. Any of that strike you as potentially innovative and solution focused when it comes to persuading, incentivizing employers you're dealing with to actually take a second look at graduates?
I think one of the challenges of the financial crash was that the SMEs picked up a lot of the slack in the graduate market from some of the data I've seen.
Yeah.
And of course that's not the case here. When we look at the data, we did some partnership research with ADCAS, and the SMEs were hit so much harder than the larger graduate employers at the moment. So anything, I agree, those comments about working at a local level, and we were involved in that Universities UK piece as well. I think what we need to do here is stimulate employers to hire people in some way, to give people experience, so they are doing something, and that's the bottom line. And I look at my own experience, and as well as all this, I'm actually running an SME at the same time.
Right.
And we've done some work with a couple of universities, and we've hired interns that we just wouldn't have the funding to do, and it's the universities that support it. We've given those people great experience. So I think at that local level, universities are able to, and colleges as well, able to channel that activity through their local relationships and really support those businesses. Because I think the other problem is we come out of furlough is, of course, and we're seeing in the headlines this week, the stark reality is, businesses are having to cut back on headcount. If you're cutting back on headcount, where on earth do you find the capacity to bring more young people in? So I think it's that real stimulus, meaningful stimulus, that somebody running a business can go, actually, do you know what? That money means I can do something with some people that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And that's what stimulates really. And often, we're talking about Sheffield, things like the Sheffield Rise programme with Sheffield Hallam, Sheffield University, and also the local council. I mean, that's a great way of getting SMEs graduates into local businesses. So anything like that, I think, can only have a positive effect.
Alas, running out of time in this segment, but I did just want to get a quick sentence from all three of you before we sign off for the next section. I mean, Stephen, if there was just one priority then, I'll ask this of Martin and, of course, Richard as well. I mean, if there was one area that you would prioritise around graduates then in terms of government policy, financial incentives, what's your number one choice then for this summer?
Stimulating that activity so employers can actually give experiences to graduates, to actually hire them, get them into organisations and get them doing something, because that will stimulate those organisations to grow, and work will come out of it. And I think also we know that SMEs tend to grow at a higher rate than bigger businesses out of a recession.
Sure, well, they are 95% of the economy. Martin, what's your one sentence?
Stimulating employer demand, because Tom, stimulating employer demand, it is the
Stephen,
economy stupid. Yeah. It is the economy stupid, I think, in this case. Okay. And the link between stimulating demand and internship and job rotation, I think in that context, that's my pitch for tonight, Tom.
That's really fascinating. Richard, final word to you then.
Yeah,
what's your priority?
The same, really, getting people into the labour market, but making sure you do it in a way that doesn't displace others already there.
Right. So from build then to demand by the sounds of it from this brilliant expert panel this evening. Richard Hewitt, Director of Higher Education at MZ, Professor Martin Jones, Deputy Vice-Chancellor at Staffordshire University, Stephen Isherwood, Chief Executive at the Institute of Student Employers. Thanks so much for joining us this evening.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Buick.
Sometimes it really feels like I lose control. Honestly, I can't even find my home. Cause when you see light, I tend to fade. But city lights and you're in space, and I don't think I'm ever gonna get it right. I'm drowning underwater, and you're just making it harder. Need to let you go to find myself. Cause I keep on falling, and you're the one watching. Need to let you go to find myself. You are only bringing out the worst in me. Now I really don't know what the best in me is. Cause when you see light, I tend to fade. With city lights and you're in space, and I don't think I'm ever gonna get it right. I'm drowning underwater, and you're just making it harder. Need to let you go to find myself. Cause I keep on falling, and you're the one watching. Need to let you go to find myself. I'm drowning underwater. Need to let you go to find myself. Cause I keep on falling. Need to let you go to find myself. I'm drowning underwater, and you're just making it harder. Need to let you go to find myself. Cause I keep on falling, and you're the one watching. Need to let you go to find myself.
That track was Find Myself by Klinger with What 3RS, a song I think we've played a couple of times already on the live version of this show. Coming up now is a hashtag Stand Up for Skills segment with a slight twist. Rather than hand over the mic to that seasoned campaigner Kirsty Donnelly MBE, as I'd normally do at this time, I'm going to instead continue as presenter, interviewing both Kirsty and another seasoned campaigner who remarkably just keeps on getting the Prime Minister to announce really positive things about apprenticeships and FE. I'm referring, of course, to that one-man Ministry of Skills campaigns, the MP for Harlow and Chair of the House of Commons Education Select Committee, Robert Helfand. Robert, Kirsty, welcome to you both.
Good morning. Hello there. Hi, Tom.
Now, earlier today, City and Guilds published the latest in the series of its research reports called Recovery and Resilience, Reskilling Our Way Back into Work. Kirsty, both you and Robert have written forwards to this really fascinating report. In a nutshell, tell us what your 23-page document, Recovery and Resilience, is saying.
Well, thanks, Tom. I mean, I think it's very apt that it comes on the back of the Prime Minister only this week talking about build, build, build. I think we would probably say skills, 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 because basically what we're talking about in the report is the need to act now. And what the report is, I think what's the nuance of the report is possibly different to some of the other really good reports that are also saying very similar things about what's needed to actually help us through what is, from an economic and jobs crisis point of view, one of the worst we'll have possibly ever seen in our lifetimes is the research with YouGov, where we sort of looked at those who are going to be hardest hit and what needs to be done to really help the poorest face that toughest climb back out of unemployment post-COVID. So, I mean, in many respects, the calls to action are largely around let's redirect the funding that's already available. I'm sure Rob will talk later about some of his passions around, creating skills credits and incentives for employers just to keep young people and indeed adults in work where we can, because this economy is going to recover eventually and we need to stick with it and make something happen now to start to address the problems we face.
Yeah, well, let's hope Andy Haldane, the chief economist at the Bank of England, is right. This is going to be a V-shaped recovery. Robert, in your forward to the report, you said that FE is too often a neglected part of the system and that it was frequently seen as being for other people's children. A reference, I think, to something Boris Johnson's post-16 advisor, Alison Wolfe, once wrote in her book. Anyway, do you really think we're on the cusp here of something big for FE and the skills sector?
Well, I hope so, because too often further education has been called the Cinderella sector. And I always like to respond to this by saying it's worth reminding ourselves that Cinderella actually became a member of the royal family. And what we need to do is banish the two ugly sisters of underfunding and snobbery. And I think it could be potentially exciting. The Prime Minister did his speech this week at an FE college in Dudley. He'd been talking about the work apprenticeships and skills. The government we've got an education secretary who went to an FE college. We've got a skills minister, Gillian Keegan, who is, I think, the only MP, I'm very jealous of her actually, the only MP to have done a degree apprenticeship in the House of Commons. So we are talking about apprenticeship skills now in a way that perhaps we haven't done for quite a few years. So let's obviously the proof is in the pudding, but the fact that reports like the one that City and Guilds have done, the Rolls-Royce of training providers, a long-established blue-chip charity, that's come out. Other reports are coming out, as Kirsty said. There is a mood out there to make this happen, and let's see what comes of it in terms of government policy.
As you say, I mean, definitely the mood music has changed, although you'll know this, Robert, it's not the first time a Conservative Prime Minister has given a speech at an FE college trailing a sort of major investment in FE. Theresa May did something similar with the Auger report before that got off the tracks and reported. And I think, obviously those in the sector are still waiting, aren't they, for the outcome of that? I mean, do you see that as the game in town now, or has COVID and all the other things that have happened in the last year perhaps mean that we've got to, as it sort of says in this report, build on what works now? Kirsty, do you want to answer that first, or Robert? Go on, go ahead.
No. I think that COVID has overshadowed everything, and it's highlighted our existing huge skills deficit, but also the loss in terms, and the report highlights this, of people on low incomes, the apprentice redundancies, the fall in starts, the apprenticeship starts, particularly for younger apprentices. It's nothing short of disastrous, and that's why the Prime Minister, who says, well, we're going to have an opportunity guarantee for all young people, whether it's going to be skills or learning or an apprenticeship, it's got to mean something, and the report helps flesh out the policy to make it happen.
Yeah, and Tom, if I may just sort of come on the back of that, I mean, I think Rob's absolutely right. And, I think the reality is, I mean, there was an article that you may have seen in The Guardian this morning regarding the HE's minister's view of what HE needs to do. And I think that probably is a telling sign that although August feels like it got kicked a little bit into the long grass, I don't think it's gone away. I have a feeling that, we are into a period of rebalancing now and creating more equity. I think, as Rob's just suggested, we need to create greater equity for those groups who are much further away from the socio-economic market.
Indeed. I mean, that's the point, isn't it? Olga made that reference to the fact that there are twice as many students in higher education. There are twice as many students in further education as there is in our universities, yet universities on average get twice as much funding. And Michelle Donnellan, the universities minister, made a pretty dynamite speech, I think, this week, where she said, and I quote here actually, she said too many graduates have been misled by the expansion of popular sounding courses with no real demand from the labour market. Is what you're proposing in this report, Kirsty, will that meet the needs of the labour market going forward?
Well, I think absolutely, because I think, Tom, what we've all recognised, and I think the report really does focus on that, is the need to, whatever happens now with policy, with funding, it's got to be demand-led. It's got to be led by what local industries, what's happening in those local regions, especially those where there's most deprivation. Let's just take infrastructure. We know there's going to be huge investment, billions of investment, much-needed investment in infrastructure. We heard the Prime Minister say, build, 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 hence my slightly cheeky skills, because you can't build without skills. No. And therefore, I think there is a really great opportunity now to really look at that demand and really focus the opportunity to help people who've maybe been in one industry and now find themselves potentially unemployed. How do they take their transferable skills and move from industry A into industry B? The opportunity for somebody, for example, maybe who's been working in the airline industry, how might we find them sort of working in the healthcare industry? Because some of the transferable skills do transfer across very, very well. So what we need is the funding and the mechanisms to make those short course interventions happen, as well as Rob was saying earlier, we mustn't forget about the very important role of apprenticeships as well.
Robert, do you think a day of reckoning's coming for our universities in terms of the funding's going to be rebalanced towards FE going forward?
Well, what I want is funding rebalanced to degree apprenticeships, to further education, to working whilst learning. I think the whole university experience has got to change. So let's say you're a history graduate, you would do a significant part of your time perhaps in an apprenticeship, perhaps on a paid internship scheme or a traineeship, working in the British Museum or in an archaeology centre, whatever it may be. I think the way the fourth industrial revolution is coming, millions of jobs potentially going to be lost unless we reskill, retrain and think about how we study. And traditional academic learning, I think, has got to evolve to reflect the fourth industrial revolution. And further education colleges are, as well as university technical schools, are an important part of that. And that's why the report, which says that at the moment businesses have a research and development tax credit, and the government are very keen on that because they want more research and science. Understandable, but why on earth we have to at this time give businesses every possible financial incentive in order to hire apprenticeships, retrain their workers in the skills they need? If they're doing that, they should get a skills tax credit as well. And I think that is a very important, that should be funded, in my view, out of the $3 billion skills fund that the government have announced.
And is that like a tax relief that's paid back through the paycheck, or if you're self-employed via self-assessment return?
They would work in the same way as the R&D, research and development tax credit. And if businesses, but it's to be, it's not about recasting middle managers, getting them to do MBAs. It's got to be in the skills that the country needs as well. So you would retrain, if companies are retraining their workers, if they're hiring young apprentices, they should get some financial incentive for doing so, I think. And I'm talking about non-levy payers predominantly here.
Yeah. Kirsty, final word to you. I mean, another big idea in the report is around setting up these sort of skills and lifelong learning hubs. How do you see those panning out then?
Yeah, I mean, I think the call for action there is around the fact that we've already talked about the great, provision we've already got through colleges, and also the role that independent training providers can play as well in that. But But I do think we do need, as Rob was just saying, a different model. I mean, we mustn't forget the impact that digital has had, throughout COVID. We have TIP now, and therefore we mustn't lose that opportunity to rethink how learning, how assessment, how even jobs support and getting into jobs can be delivered digitally. So the whole idea of the lifelong learning employment and training hubs is to provide places that link out to existing provision. It's not just about creating brand new provision, but also to provide a digital space where people can get the support they need, where they can find out in that demand-led system I was talking about earlier, where are the local jobs, where are the vacancies that are available this week, and what is the short course intervention that I might need in order to get me to into that vacancy. So it's about drawing on the best of what's already out there in the local regions, but also creating a new overlay of collaboration between those organisations, so we absolutely get that right supply and demand tension.
Okay, sounds great. Kirsty Donnelly, Chief Executive of the City and Guilds Group, and Robert Halfon, MP,
Thanks, Tom.
Chair of the Education Select Committee. Great stuff as ever. Thanks for coming on the show this evening.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom.
You're listening to Skills World Live with Tom Buick.
That's a wrap, ladies and gentlemen, on another jam-packed super show. Thanks again to all our guests this evening. Really great debate. Don't forget to tune in next week for the last of these live weekly shows before we take a break for the summer. Have no fear, though. There are some big plans for Skills World Live in the autumn. Just time now to say thanks to my programme editor, Gavin O'Mara, and of course, our digital producer, Ellie Hansen. Skills World Live is supported by the Federation of Awarding Bodies Platinum Partners Programme. Playing you out now with this track, another Europop belter, We Could Run Away with Mia Stegmar. Goodbye.
Subscribe to Skills World Live at fenews.co.uk/Skills World.